The first rule of working at San Judas Terminal is simple: never ask questions. I learned that on my first shift, written in thick red ink on a note taped to the glass of the ticket booth. The paper was old, curling at the edges, like it had been there for decades. Beneath the rule, someone had scrawled smaller warnings in shaky handwriting. 1. Never talk to the passengers unless they speak first. 2. Do not stare at the trains for too long. They sometimes stare back. 3. If a train arrives without a number, do not board it. Do not let anyone else board it. 4. And most importantly, never question the conductor. That last rule was underlined 3 times. I remember staring at that list on my first night, wondering if it was some elaborate joke. But I was desperate for a job, and the ad I had responded to was oddly specific. Night attendant needed. Must follow instructions. The pay was more than decent. Cash, no questions asked. No interviews. No background checks. Just show up, take the job, and don't break the rules. Now, months later, I don't laugh at that list anymore. I glance at the station clock. The hands are frozen at exactly 3:33 a.m., as always. It doesn't matter when I check. It's always the same time. I don't know if the clock is broken or if time itself is different here. The terminal is quiet tonight. It's always quiet. Not the kind of silence you find in an empty room, but the kind that presses against your skin, heavy and unnatural. The kind of quiet that makes you hear things that aren't really there. The station itself is underground, beneath the city, but no subway maps list it. No public records mention it. If you asked around, no one would be able to tell you where to find San Judas Terminal, because as far as the living world is concerned, it doesn't exist. But the dead know where it is. A faint hum vibrates through the steel tracks beneath my feet. A train is coming. I straighten up in my seat, eyes locked on the dark tunnel ahead. There's no announcement, no sound of brakes screeching against metal. The train just arrives. 1 second, there's an empty platform. The next, a long silver train is waiting, its doors sliding open with a soft hiss. I hold my breath as the passengers step out. They're always quiet. They don't shuffle or sigh or cough. They don't check their phones or adjust their coats. They simply wait. Most of them look normal at first glance, just tired people in old-fashioned clothes. But if you stare too long, you start noticing things. Some of them don't breathe. Some blink too slowly, like they're still remembering how. And some don't have faces at all. I keep my head down and do my job. I punch tickets, directing them toward their connecting trains. I never ask where they're going. I never ask why they're here, because I already know. A soft chuckle echoes from behind me. My stomach tightens. He's here. I turn slowly, and there he stands, Jesus Morales, the conductor. His crisp uniform is spotless, his brass buttons gleaming under the flickering station lights. He smiles at me, his teeth just a little too perfect, his eyes too dark to reflect the dim glow around us. Another quiet night. Yeah, Carlo, he says, his voice smooth as silk. I nod. I don't trust my voice. Jesus tilts his head, studying me like he knows something I don't. He always does that. I hate it. You're doing good work, he says, stepping closer. Following the rules. That's important here. I swallow hard, forcing a smile. Just doing my job. Jesus's grin widens. For a split second, I swear his shadow stretches wrong, bending against the floor in a way that makes my stomach twist. He leans in slightly, his voice barely above a whisper. Keep it that way. Then, just like that, he's gone. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. My fingers are cold. My palms are clammy. The train doors hiss shut, and without a sound, the train vanishes into the dark tunnel. Gone like it was never there. I exhale slowly and glance back at the rules taped to the booth. The last one seems bolder tonight. Never question the conductor. I run my fingers over the notes, curling edges, my pulse still hammering in my ears. Something in my gut tells me I should quit this job, leave and never look back. But something else, something deeper, tells me that might not be possible anymore. I've learned not to ask questions at San Judas Terminal. The less I know, the better. That's what I tell myself every time I clock in for my shift, every time I watch the hollow-eyed passengers shuffle onto the waiting trains. But that night, something changed. It started with the sound of brakes screeching against the tracks, louder than usual, sharper, like metal clawing against metal. I glanced at the schedule taped to the booth's window. No train was supposed to arrive for another 20 minutes. And yet, there it was, a hulking, black train rolling and like it had emerged from the dark itself. I checked the train number, but there wasn't one. Just an empty space where it should have been. A bad feeling slithered up my spine. Rule 3. If a train arrives without a number, do not board it. Do not let anyone else board it. I straightened, my pulse quickening. The station remained silent except for the soft hum of flickering lights overhead. The other passengers, if they were even passengers, paid no mind to the train, their faces blank as they waited for their own rides. But then I noticed her. A woman stood near the platform's edge, alone. She was different. She wasn't like the others, those shadowy, silent figures that never made eye contact. She looked alive. Too alive. Her breathing was ragged, her chest rising and falling fast, like she had been running. Her clothes were damp with sweat, and when she turned toward me, I saw pure terror in her eyes. I hesitated. We weren't supposed to interact with passengers unless they spoke first. That was another rule. But before I could decide what to do, she stepped closer. "Please," she whispered. "I can't get on that train." Her voice barely reached me, but I heard the desperation in it. She wasn't asking. She was begging. I looked back at the train. Its doors had opened, revealing only darkness inside. No seats, no lights. Just a yawning black void, as if stepping inside meant stepping into nothing. The woman flinched, backing away. Behind me, the station's intercom crackled to life. "All passengers, please board immediately." The voice wasn't normal. It was layered, distorted, as if multiple voices were speaking at once. I swallowed hard. I should have followed the rules. I should have turned away, pretended I didn't see her. But the fear in her eyes, it was real. Too real. "Come with me," I whispered. She hesitated for only a second before nodding. I grabbed her wrist, her skin ice-cold under my grip, and pulled her toward the maintenance room behind the ticket booth. My heart hammered against my ribs. The moment the door shut behind us, the station changed. The humming lights buzzed louder, the sound almost like insects swarming. The air thickened, pressing in like an invisible weight. Through the small window in the door, I saw shadows flicker unnaturally across the platform. Too fast, too sharp. Something was angry. The intercom blared again. This time, the voices were deeper, more insistent. All passengers must board. Then, the lights flicked off. For the first time since I started working at St. Judas Terminal, I realized something. These rules weren't just rules. They were warnings. And I had just broken one. The station was quiet again. Too quiet. After what had just happened with the woman and the numberless train, I could feel the walls pressing in around me. The air was thicker than before, like the station itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to make another mistake. I took slow, measured steps back to the ticket booth, my hands clammy, my heartbeat too loud in my ears. I needed a moment, just a second to breathe. The old wooden booth creaked as I stepped inside. The tiny space was lined with faded schedules and peeling posters from a time before I was even born. I ran a hand through my hair and let out a shaky breath. I had broken a rule. The woman was still hidden in the maintenance room, and I had no idea what that meant for me. Then I noticed it. Tucked behind the rusted cash drawer was something I hadn't seen before. A small, leather-bound book, its edges frayed, its spine cracked with age. It had been shoved deep into the corner, hidden like a secret meant to stay buried. I pulled it out with cautious fingers. The cover was blank except for faint indentations, as if a title had once been embossed there, but had long since worn away. A musty smell rose from the pages as I flipped it open. The first entry was written in shaky, uneven handwriting. "My name is William Hart. If you're reading this, then you're the next one. I'm sorry." My skin prickled. I turned the page. This station is not what it seems. You probably figured that out already. The rules, they're real. Every single one. Break them, and you'll see why. I made the mistake of questioning them. Now, I hear things in the walls. I swallowed hard. The handwriting shifted, growing messy, as the entries went on. The words scrawled like they had been written in a hurry. "The conductor is not human." I froze. My hands tightened around the book, my breath caught in my throat. "Jesus Morales. He acts like he's in charge, like he just works here, but it's a lie. He's something else. He doesn't leave. He doesn't sleep. And if he ever calls you by your full name, run. I slammed the book shut. My chest tightened, my stomach twisting itself into knots. I glanced around the station, my pulse hammering in my ears. The dim lights flickered, buzzing faintly overhead. The tracks stretched into the darkness, empty, waiting. I wanted to throw the book away, pretend I had never seen it. But my fingers refused to let go. Because, deep down, I already knew it was telling the truth. Jesus always smiled too much. He always appeared when I least expected him. And I had never, not once, seen him blink. I opened the book again, flipping further ahead. The last few pages were smeared, almost unreadable, as if the writer's hand had been shaking violently. If you're still here, it means you haven't figured out the way out yet. Maybe there isn't one. Maybe I waited too long. But listen, don't trust the schedules. Some of these trains don't go anywhere. Some come back empty, and some don't come back at all. A faint creak echoed from somewhere in the station. I looked up, heart pounding. The platform was empty. The shadows stretched long across the floor, unmoving. But I suddenly felt watched. I turned the page to the final entry. The handwriting was barely legible now, frantic scratches of ink running into each other. If he ever calls you by your full name, run. The last word was underlined, so hard it tore through the page. A slow, deliberate tapping sound came from behind me. Footsteps. My throat went dry. I turned my head. Jesus stood just outside the booth, watching me. He smiled. I first noticed the disappearances on a quiet Tuesday night. San Judas Terminal was always strange, always unsettling, but this was different. Something was wrong, and I could feel it in my bones. I stood in my usual spot near the ticket booth, watching the latest batch of passengers shuffle onto the platform. They never spoke unless spoken to first. That was one of the rules. Most of them looked tired, confused, or simply lost. Some were dressed in modern clothing, but others wore outfits that looked decades, even centuries old. I had long stopped questioning it. But then, as I counted the figures waiting for the next train, I noticed something. One of them, a tall man in a gray suit, was gone. I hadn't seen him leave. Hadn't seen him step onto a train. He had simply been there 1 second, and then he wasn't. I rubbed my eyes, trying to convince myself I had miscounted. But no, I had counted 7 people when they arrived. Now there were 6. The train doors hissed open. The remaining passengers shuffled forward, their movements slow and mechanical. I scanned the platform again, my heartbeat picking up. Where did he go? There was nowhere to hide. The station had no real exits, no bathrooms, no staircases leading up. Just the tunnel, the tracks, and me. The train's whistle blew, snapping me out of my thoughts. I watched as the last of the passengers boarded, then checked my logbook. I was supposed to write down how many travelers left on each train. My pen hesitated above the paper. 6 or 7. I had seen 7. I knew I had. My hands felt clammy. Jesus was going to notice if the numbers didn't match. I wrote down 6 and slammed the book shut. The train rumbled away into the darkness. The station fell silent again. I took a slow breath, trying to shake the unease crawling up my spine. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe the man had gotten on the train when I wasn't looking. That was the most logical explanation, right? But then it happened again. A woman in a red coat stood by the tracks, waiting for the midnight train. She was older, maybe in her late 50s, with a solemn face and tired eyes. I glanced at the clock above the tunnel entrance. 5 more minutes until arrival. I turned away for just a second, just to check the schedule, and when I looked back, the woman was gone. The air felt heavier. I swallowed hard and scanned the platform. My eyes darted to the tunnel, the train tracks, the flickering gaslights along the walls. Nothing. I stepped forward cautiously, my boots clicking against the old tiles. I peered into the tunnel, half expecting to see her there, lurking in the dark. But there was nothing, just the distant hum of an approaching train. I turned back to my booth, my mind racing. I reached for my logbook, flipping through the pages. I needed proof, something to tell me I wasn't losing my mind. But then, my stomach dropped. The previous page, the one where I had written down the number 6, was blank. I stared at it, my hands trembling. The ink, the numbers, the words, they were just gone, as if they had never been written in the first place. I checked the other pages. All the record from the past few nights were there, untouched. Only that entry had vanished. I felt a presence behind me. Slowly, I turned my head. Jesus was standing a few feet away, watching me with that same unsettling smile. "Something wrong, Carlo." His voice was smooth, patient. Too patient. I clenched my fist to keep my hands from shaking. "No, I lied. Just making sure everything's in order." His smile widened just a little. "Good. You know how important it is to keep proper records." I nodded stiffly. Jesus held my gaze for a long moment before stepping past me, his polished boots clicking softly against the floor. He stopped at the edge of the platform, looking down the empty tracks. "Some things," he murmured, almost to himself, "have a way of slipping through the cracks." I didn't reply. I couldn't. The next train arrived. I counted the passengers. This time, I didn't blink. The maintenance door wasn't supposed to open. I had checked it before, locked, rusted shut, as if it hadn't been used in years. But tonight, when I pressed my hand against it, the latch gave way with a soft click. I hesitated. The station was quiet, but something about the silence felt wrong. It was too heavy, pressing against my ears like I was sinking underwater. My fingers hovered over the handle, and for the first time since I started working here, I asked myself, do I really want to know what's down there? The air beyond the door smelled different. Not like dust and oil, the way the rest of the station did. This was older, heavier, like damp earth and something long rotten, a scent that made my stomach twist. I stepped inside. The tunnel sloped downward at a steep angle, the dim yellow glow of the station fading behind me. My flashlight flickered as I moved, the beam weak and unreliable. The walls here weren't tiled like the main platform. They were rough, uneven concrete, the kind you see in unfinished basements. Water dripped from somewhere unseen, the droplets echoing in the narrow space. I kept walking. The further I went, the colder it got. My breath started to fog in front of me, my fingers stiffening around the flashlight. The tunnel stretched on, bending slightly to the right, and, as I turned the corner, I saw them. Tickets. Hundreds of them. They were plastered to the walls, aged and brittle, held in place by something dark that had seeped into the concrete like ink. My eyes scanned the names printed on them, each one written in a neat, careful hand. Some had faded beyond recognition. Others were clear as day. Then I saw a pattern. Some names were familiar. I ran my fingers over one near the center. Michael E. Ramirez. The name tugged at something in the back of my mind. Then it hit me. Michael had worked here before me. I remembered his name from the station logs. He had been the night attendant before I took the job. But his employment records, they just ended. No resignation. No termination. No explanation. I moved to the next one. Derek J. Holloway. Another night attendant before my time. And another. And another. I staggered back, my breath coming fast now. There were too many names. Then I saw mine. Carlo V. It wasn't finished. Someone had started carving it, but hadn't completed it. I turned around so fast that my flashlight slipped from my grip, hitting the ground with a sharp crack. The bulb shattered, plunging me into darkness. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Then, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from deeper in the tunnel. I pressed my back against the wall, my pulse hammering in my ears. A voice whispered from the darkness. "You weren't supposed to come down here." I didn't wait to see who, or what, had spoken. I ran. The station felt different tonight. I noticed at the moment I stepped back into the main hall, my breath still shallow from the things I'd seen below. The air was heavier, the silence thicker. The dim overhead lights flickered, but not in the way they normally did. This wasn't the usual hum of failing electricity. It was deliberate. Watching. The station was watching me. I gripped the old, tattered attendant's journal in my hands, its pages crumpled from my desperate search for answers. The wall of names I had found in the tunnels lingered in my mind, a list of forgotten attendants. Each name crossed out except for one. Mine. I hadn't had time to think about what it meant. I hadn't had time to process the way the ink of my name looked fresher than the others. Because as soon as I had turned back, I felt it. Someone had been standing right behind me. I hadn't dared to look. Now, back in the main hall, I tried to steady my breath. I adjusted my cap, wiped the sweat from my brow, and made my way toward the ticket booth like nothing had changed. Like I hadn't seen something I was never supposed to see. The intercom crackled overhead. A single word whispered through the static. "Carlo." I stopped. My pulse pounded against my ribs. Slowly I turned. Jesus stood on the platform across from me, hands tucked into the deep pockets of his conductor's uniform. He was watching me, his dark eyes gleaming under the station lights. His usual smirk curled at the corner of his lips, but this time, something felt wrong. He knew. "Long night?" he asked, tilting his head slightly. His voice was smooth, calm, too calm. I forced a swallow, my throat dry. "Yeah." He stepped forward, his polished shoes clicking against the cracked tile floor. The sound echoed in a way it shouldn't have, as if the station had grown larger, emptier, stretching around us. "You've been busy," he mused, eyes flicking to the journal in my hand. I tightened my grip. "Just going over some old notes." Jesus let out a soft chuckle. "Is that so?" I said nothing. The silence between us stretched. He took another step closer. "I have a question for you, Carlo," he said, his voice still light, almost amused. "Would you like to know what happened to the others?" My stomach twisted. The others. The ones who came before me. The ones whose names had been scratched out. I shook my head. "No." Jesus sighed, shaking his head as if he were disappointed. "Pity," he said. "I think you'd find it enlightening." His eyes flickered with something I didn't like. Something I didn't understand. Then he smiled wider and spoke again. "Carlo Vega." It hit me like a slap. Not just my first name. My full name. The words sank deep, curling around my ribs like a vice. The moment he said them, the station shifted. The air grew thick and suffocating, like I had just stepped underwater. The lights above us buzzed violently, pulsing in time with my own frantic heartbeat. Jesus watched me closely, his head tilting further, studying me like a scientist watching an experiment unfold. I remember the journal. The last entry. The warning. "If he ever calls you by your full name, run." My body moved before my mind could catch up. I turned and bolted, my footsteps slamming against the tile. The walls of the station blurred as I sprinted toward the exit, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind me, I heard it. Jesus laughing. Not chasing. Not running after me. Just laughing. Like he already knew how this would end. The air was thick with a strange energy. The hum of the station, the rattling of distant trains, had turned into something alive. The walls were breathing, slow, deliberate like a pulse. I could feel in my bones. The ground beneath my feet shifted slightly, as if the whole terminal was adjusting, preparing for something. I ran. My breath came in short gasps. I didn't know if I was running from Jesus or running for myself. There were no rules anymore. Not here. Not in this place. Every warning, every instruction I'd been given, now felt useless, like the words had been written by someone who never intended anyone to escape. A faint light appeared ahead, the glow of the platform, but this time, it wasn't like before. This wasn't a normal train coming in. This wasn't part of the schedule. It was the train, the one that wasn't supposed to exist. I knew that the second I saw it. The numberless train, the one I'd been warned about, the one I'd been told not to board, the one that called to me with a voice I couldn't quite hear but felt. My pulse quickened. I slowed to a stop, staring at the train. It stood there, silent, its doors wide open, waiting like it always had, like it always would. The fog inside the train was thick, too thick to see beyond. There were no passengers, no sounds, just the low rumble of its engine as it idled in the dead air. And then I heard his voice. "Carlo." I froze. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't a command. It was just my name, like he'd been saying it for years, like he knew me, like he'd always known me. And he was calling me, pulling me, coaxing me toward him. "Carlo, step inside." Jesus stood at the foot of the train, his dark eyes glimmering in the half-light. His smile was wide, but this time it wasn't kind. It wasn't anything. It was just a stretch of teeth, the kind that meant something had already been decided for me. He was waiting. He always had been. I wanted to turn away. I wanted to scream, to run, to tear my feet from the ground and never look back. But my body wouldn't move. My eyes were locked onto his, and I felt something inside me shift. It was like he was pulling at something deep, something I didn't even know was there. The air grew colder, and I heard the faintest whistle, like a distant train approaching. But it wasn't distant. It was right here, right now, inside me. "Get on," he said, his voice too smooth, too inviting. "You've been waiting for this, Carlo. You know it. I know it. Don't fight it." I didn't want to go. I didn't want to step into that train, into that fog, into the unknown that had already swallowed so many before me. I could hear the other attendants' voices in my head, their warnings, their pleas. Don't break the rules, they had said. Follow the steps, and you'll be fine. But I wasn't fine. None of us were. I wasn't just an attendant here anymore. I was one of them. One of the lost souls, stuck in the loop, working to keep the station running, feeding the darkness, serving a purpose I didn't understand. And then it hit me. What if this was it? What if I had been waiting for this moment the entire time, without even knowing it? What if I wasn't supposed to leave? What if no one ever left? I took a step forward. Jesus' grin widened. He knew what I was thinking. He knew everything. He always had. You understand now, he said softly, as though I'd passed some kind of test. You belong here, Carlo. All the others? They never knew. But you? You were always meant to stay. The train doors clicked closed behind me, and I didn't look back. I felt the ground shift again, this time under my feet. The train lurched forward, and I sank into my seat. The fog around me thickened, swirling like a storm, and I closed my eyes. But even as I closed my eyes, I knew one thing for sure. There would always be another station, always another attendant, always another lost soul. And somewhere, out there in the dark, someone else would hear their name called. Someone else would make their choice. I had made mine.